Hello.
Good morning.
So, just give me 1 second. Cool. So, I think it may just be us today. It's okay. So, is there anything you would like to demo?
I do not have anything to showcase. I think Graham showed off pre-working in the last demo very
That's right.
well.
Yes.
The only thing I found in pre-prod that looked a little weird was we were not deploying a specific version of the Pages application. That was fixed today. So now, at least in pre-prod, we're now running the same version of the GitLab application that we need to be using. So now going forward, when we go into staging and production, we should be deploying the auto deploy versions that we want instead of the master image that gets created. I'm not even sure how CNG tags master appropriately. I don't really care either, but we don't want to be running that version. So that's at least fixed. So at this
Good stuff.
point, I now consider pre-prod done as far as its migration of pages.
Awesome.
So staging is next.
Awesome. That's great work. Do you what are you thinking about the rate limiting additional piece? It's rate limited, right? That's kind
So
of
based on the
tangential.
Slack conversation that you and I had, the rate limiting work is not going to work in Kubernetes at this moment in time because of the way the chart is configured. If we want that to work prior to us migrating this service into production, we'll want to get ahead of that and we want to start working on the Helm chart like now. If we're okay with pushing pages into production first, we could always modify the Helm chart later. So I think we need to figure out
Okay.
where the priorities lie, because I could make the change in Omnibus. Supposedly, I know I can make the change in Omnibus. It's just a matter of prioritizing that part. But I know that should work because all that we need to change is a minor configuration change in our Omnibus configurations for pages, plus a minor AJ proxy change, and then testing to roll it out smoothly and through to production. For our Helm chart, we do not support the flexibility we need to make sure that configuration works as desired the way that we utilize the Helm chart.
I see. Okay.
And I think this stems to the fact that the rate limiting work wasn't taken into account with how the Helm chart operates. The Helm chart was built well before rate limiting was considered. So I think it's just a missing configuration item that Omnibus just happens to be more flexible in the way we can configure it. That simply does not exist with the implementation that was created inside of our Helm chart. So not like anyone missed anything. It's just support is just more flexible in Omnibus by default.
Awesome. Okay, that makes sense. Cool. Let me follow up there then and try and find out what the priority of the rate limiting is. And then we'll either do one of those two options. We'll either do it as part of this migration, or we'll do the migration and then do the work. So we won't do it on the VMs.
Yeah. So effectively, and this goes into the next point, essentially, is that we've got three things all not really clashing, but they're contending for, or they're competing for each other. Is the migration of the service itself, the desire for the API rate limit or rate limiting of pages, and then Canary. So I'm trying to figure out what we want to do with specifically Canary as well, along with all that other stuff.
So I'm completely we have a lot of our delivery projects are quite overlapping, and I don't really mind where the work sits. I guess in terms of the Pages Canary stuff, do you need a Pages Canary to help with the migration?
The work that Jarv did to AJ Proxy should enable us to where I could create a canary deployment in Kubernetes, and that could help us with the migration procedure entirely, because we could roll this out through Canary, and then once we validate things are working as desired, we could just shove it into the main stage, and then
Right.
turn off the virtual machines. So like that in itself is beneficial. I just did make sure it's going to work appropriately, because there are some differences in the way that we configure
Mm.
configure our omnibus installs versus the Kubernetes installation. And I did bring one of those concerns up yesterday, and it looks like Jarb addressed that either this morning or last night. So it's just a matter of determining whether it will work and what other changes I need to take into account, which I have not
Okay.
completed a full audit on. I figured I would
Cool.
do that when I get to that step.
Yeah, that's totally fine. And I think this is kind of where Graham's going to be a little bit similar as well. So Graham's probably in an almost identical situation in that at some point the mixed deployment migration, mixed deployment testing, reorder stuff will require a pages canary, but it doesn't have to be step one. So I think probably what I'm guessing is that like both the pages migration and the mixed deployment reorder work can continue on. At some point, either one finishes and then we can pick up the extra work needed for pages canary, or one or the other may actually genuinely need the whole thing and we can add it into that project.
Yeah.
Um,
Because it's
but I
not more work to add a canary pages environment, unless there's something missing in HA Proxy's cookbook. Because the Kubernetes part should be relatively simplistic. So
okay,
like we
yeah.
could probably do this at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's totally fine. Like I say, like I think in a way it's like you're kind of coming at these things in slightly different ways, but the solution will be the same. So for the
Yeah.
migration, it's like, does it make it safer to migrate? And on Graham's work, it will be having all of these canary pieces in place means we have better test coverage. But it's totally fine if we started with like 50% of the pieces and added from there. So
Yeah.
um, so yeah,
Right.
I
So
don't mind like which way we do it. Like add it in if it makes sense. If it ends up being hard or it doesn't add value, it's fine. We can come back to that bit later.
yeah. So I'll modify. I just assigned myself the issue to start spinning things up and staging. So what I'll do is add the
Great.
necessary bullet points or milestones to say, hey, let's make sure we add a canary pages endpoint. I did see that we have weights available in HA Proxy now, so I can now make sure that is set up correctly. So we should
Awesome.
be good to go on that front at least.
Great stuff. Okay,
Just
brilliant.
a
That's
matter
really
of
good.
testing to make sure it works as desired. And then I guess the other thing
Yeah.
we need to consider is observability for Canary, because I don't know if that's set up appropriately, but it should be.
This is a good question. Yes, and
I'll
also
figure
for
that out.
staging canary, we probably have nothing actually. Um, yeah.
Well,
So those are
considering we
other
don't
ones.
have a Canary pages at all, that in itself is kind of a sign. So it's just a matter of making
Yeah.
sure that things are being picked up appropriately. So
Yeah. Exactly. And then kind of in terms of like people, so we kind of talked a little bit yesterday, but like you've got Monday, sorry, you've got like pages canary, pages migration. Graham's just started looking at the mixed deployment testing, which has changes. From next week, Henry's back. He's got the steps just to wrap up registry. So registry should be going to production next week. And then the steps to wrap up the removing Nginx from API. But following that, Henry is available to pick up new things. So at that point, we can work out like which project does it make most sense to have Henry help out with as well.
both.
Yeah,
Why not?
probably both. Everything. Yeah, exactly. And as you get into release management as well, like if you want to step back from some projects, we can reshuffle things in the next week or so.
Indeed.
Awesome. Great. Yeah, and then R5.
So I was just answering a question that
Great.
Jarv had last week, but since he's not here, he doesn't get to hear the answer. When I deployed pages into pre-prod, I was just using our Helm chart defaults for request limits and resource requests and limits. I figured when I get it to staging, I've got a dedicated issue to figure out what we want to do with resource requests and limits. I would evaluate
Great.
at that moment in time what we want to do with that. I have not looked at any metrics. I have not performed any load testing yet. So right now it's just using the Helm chart default. I plan to do the same thing when I implement into staging. And it'll be after we start taking traffic is when I'll start looking at that stuff, because that'll be when I'll start doing the necessary testing. Also looking at metrics to figure out what those values ought to be.
Awesome. Cool. That makes sense. Excellent. How at this stage, how comfortable are you feeling with the pages migration? Because I know we kind of, before going in, we were sort of like, this is either the easiest thing to migrate or the hardest thing to migrate. Like, where do you think we're currently sitting?
I think it'll still be relatively easy. I think the only thing that's making it more difficult is just the clash of all these other things that are coming into play.
Yeah.
Which is fine. It'll still go relatively smoothly. It's just a matter of making sure that we don't step on top of each other or, screw each other over by, trying to force one priority over the other. That importantly being the API rate, the rate limiting thing, since that's not
Yes.
supported on a Helm chart, we just need to make sure we prioritize all of this appropriately. But otherwise, I think it'll be relatively fine. Just a
Great.
matter of testing and rolling through the work. The one change I know that I couldn't test in pre-prod was what's it called? The profiling, because we have that configured inside of staging production. It's not configured in pre-prod.
Right.
This is just a minor modification to the application configuration. So I don't suspect that it will not work inside of Kubernetes, because it's an application configuration, not a Kubernetes specific thing.
Okay.
So I don't see that being a problem.
Okay,
But
cool.
obviously it warrants testing. So
Awesome. That's great. That's really good.
I still have a positive outlook that this will be a relatively smooth migration, though.
Brilliant. That's great. Nice. I mean, it certainly seemed to come through pretty easily. So that's certainly good signs. Awesome. Do you have any other stuff you want to go through on pages?
Now we still got that one blocker for health checking, which would prevent us from going into production, but you tagged me on that because there's an update on that. So it's still moving along, it looks like.
It's definitely moving along, yeah. In fact, it should be moving reasonably fast, because it was last week, it was still kind of expected that it would be within 14.4. I mean, that was always going to be a little bit ambitious given like Family and Friends Day and stuff. But I'm hoping that means it's not too far out from there. So hopefully in the next few days.
We keep our Helm chart updated out of sync with releases anyway. So, depending on how they finalize that work, we'll be able to upgrade our Helm chart out of band and get that change pushed in. So
awesome. Cool. Great. Well, one thing on the page of stuff, like let us check in next week and work out like what we want to do about bringing other people in, or like handing off parts of it, so that we do get like you've got a manageable workload and other people can be involved if they want to. So let's make sure we cover that next week. But otherwise, great work. Keep going. One thing I had a question on was registry and the Helm chart. So registry is planning, is currently on schedule to enable the connection to the new registry metadata database next week. And then they have feature flags which control things being migrated. And so they'll be controlling that and running those through. But one thing they were a little bit unsure about, or a little nervous about, I guess, is Helm chart changes whilst they're running the migration. Now, there is nothing more certain than there will be Helm chart changes during this migration, because we'll probably have like months of migration to run. So, there'll be guaranteed to be changes. But I suppose two questions that like one is how much of a risk do you think there is around that? Like I'm assuming what the concern is like we change something quite generic on the Helm chart, like a setting somewhere, and that has an unexpected impact on registry. Like, is our Helm chart set up in a way where that is medium risk or like higher, lower?
So the way that migrations are run, they're specific to what the application detects that needs to. The application
Yeah.
itself is what determines whether migrations run, not our Helm chart. Like our Helm chart has a logic that says, hey, there's a new version. Let's make sure we run the job.
Yeah.
But that's it. Like that only causes a new job to run if necessary. So as long as we don't touch that logic in a negative manner, we shouldn't see negative behavior related to this job. If we, for some reason, are pushing changes in very close succession to each other, like we enable the job, the next thing is going to remove the job. We don't have protection that says, hey, is this job still running by chance?
Yeah.
That could be a problem. Because we could push, say, a configuration change out that upgrades the container registry, and then an auto deploy comes in a few minutes later and it might remove that job. That could be problematic if it's still running, obviously. Migrations usually run relatively quickly, though, and especially for the container registry where there are very few migrations, I would hope they run super speedy. So I'm not. You're throwing a wrench into this, Amy.
Well, no, I think it sounds like it's reasonably low risk, like certainly not higher risk than anything else, right?
Let's see. So I guess the one thing we should keep track of is how long it takes for those pods to finish up the jobs. If we detect that they're running for lengthy periods of time, we don't want to unnecessarily kill those jobs. Which we don't have, like the logic that we created that removes those jobs isn't going to look at whether or not the job is still running. It's just going to say, hey, it's time for you to go. Delete yourself.
Okay.
So
Okay. Is that a problem for other stuff?
say that again.
Is that a problem for other things?
No, I mean Sidekick, yeah, but these jobs are kind of special because we'll remove them entirely. Sidekick at least has the benefit of let's at least attempt to put the job back into the queue such that the next
Right.
Sidekick pod will pick it up. That's not going to happen in this case.
Interesting. Okay. Is that also true then, like if any pod just gets killed for any reason? Like, is it just simply because the job we're running as part of a kind of a rollout would be running?
So if the job fails or like the pod fails for some reason, well, okay, so let's from the aspect of Kubernetes, if the pod crashes, for example, it will try to restart the job because that's the part of the job definitions. We want to make sure it runs to completion. So Kubernetes will take care of that. If the job fails, the job will probably be stuck in some sort of crash loop. And
Right.
Kubernetes can't resolve that. There's probably a code problem at that point. So that part we're safe with because Kubernetes is doing its job and the migrations code is doing its job appropriately, theoretically. But yeah, if we delete that pod, and it's still running that migration, I'm not sure what's going to happen because we may stop the migration in the middle of it. Or in the case of a situation where I guess it depends on how the migrations run. Because if it's just a query that we send to Postgres and it just runs until that query completes, maybe we're okay. But if we have multiple migrations that do that, there might be a situation where we send one query, but we're waiting for that query to complete before we send the next migration query to the server. So we'll have an incomplete migration that will have executed. That could be problematic.
Interesting. Okay. Okay.
This sounds like we should spin up an issue for it.
Yeah, let me spin up an issue and ping Henry, because I know he spent quite a lot of time doing kind of failure testing. So it's possible he went through some of this, but it would be good to just double check that before we start. 'Cause I just don't think we can't guarantee we're not going to do it, right?
Yeah. I will look into the history between the word whilst and while.
Okay. And as I understand it, like these are the only ones we're particularly concerned about are registry changes that we roll out through like k8s workloads. Is that correct?
Yeah, like the version bumps of the application.
Yeah. Okay.
Because that's the only thing that our logic checks for. Did the version change? If yes, let's make sure we run that job. If the version doesn't change, we remove the job if it's not already gone.
Yeah.
Like if we deploy just any sort of configuration change, it's not going to create the job. And auto deploy is not going to create the job. Both of those have the potential to remove the job.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, cool. Well, let's see what let's give Henry some time to think that through on how he handled that stuff. This is where the challenge of having faster and more frequent deployments becomes increasingly troublesome, right? Back in the past, like this would not have been a problem because it was like one deployment a day, you probably don't hit this.
I wonder if at some point, like, we'll grow our deployments enough where instead of having a single GitLab deployment per cluster, it's more like we have a single deployment for or a single release for every deployment object. So today we have a release called GitLab that deploys everything to a given cluster, the registry, all the web services, etc. But maybe we'll have a release that says this release is specific to Git HTTPS. This release is specific to the container registry. This release is specific to GitLab pages, something like that. Like, I wonder if we'll get to that point, because that in itself would have some interesting challenges. It would remove this problem here that we're discussing, because all that will be dedicated to just the container registry release and nothing else. That gets us more closer towards a more component style release method, which I know Alessio is very keen on. Might be something to think about, but I'd like to see if we can't finish migrating everything to Kubernetes first. And then we got to start thinking about the operator, because it's now GA, right?
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That's a super good point then. So what are the kind of rough pieces that we will need to do to adopt the operator?
The one that I know of, and this is through conversation I had with Jason, is that it relies specifically on released versions of our Helm chart. We do not use released versions. We pluck a specific SHA whenever we want and say, use this version of the Helm chart.
Okay, yeah.
So that's a missing piece that they are already aware of that needs to be adjusted in some way, shape, or form. That's theoretically the only thing that's missing.
Interesting. Okay. Oh, that's good.
I guess the other part that's missing is the transition between you're using the Helm chart, switch to the operator. how do you do that part, the switching of that? And how do you roll
Right.
back in the case the switchover does not work correctly? Because you don't
Right.
want the operator to come and say, hey, I'm taking over, but it doesn't think anything is deployed because it may, the way the operator owns things may redeploy everything a second time, or worse, it may
Right.
say all this other stuff doesn't make sense to me. I'm going to delete all of that because I don't want to own that. I want to own this over here, and then we have some massive outage of some kind. So both of those are items that the distribution team is aware of.
Okay. Interesting. Huh. Okay.
I think
Yeah.
that's a interesting problem to solve for too.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely. Um, yeah. I mean, both of those things will definitely be things we will need to adjust for in the future. And some of that might tie in. So one of the things I've mentioned in kind of the Q4 OKR stuff, and thank you for inputting into that, is I think we're really at the stage where we need to work out how k8s workloads fits in with release tools. And what, like, perhaps it kind of touches on some of this stuff around registry, like, how do all those pieces pull together? What gets code deployed? What gets config deployed? How does it track it? So I think we could probably just do like a blueprint or something to start, but there could be some fairly hefty changes involved in that.
Yeah.
The good ones, right? Hopefully we can like solve some of the problems we have, but
yeah.
I don't know, would you reckon like a year to get rid of deployer? 6 months?
I think deployer will still live on for as long as we have virtual machines.
Italy is going to be I think is probably our longest
Gitterline prefect,
running
and
thing.
then we
Yeah.
just need to figure out what to do with migrations. Because
Yeah.
I know we support database migrations inside of our Helm chart, but can we execute those at the right time? Can we orchestrate that appropriately? That's the part that's missing.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Interesting times. Awesome. Is there anything else that you want to go through this week, or anything you need help with?
Let me just look at my to-do list really quickly. I don't believe so. I think the only thing that might be worth talking about is the use of the GitLab shell and transitioning to the GitLab shell daemon versus the OpenSSH daemon.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. That's a good one.
So let's talk about that very quickly. I spun up an issue that said, hey, how do we want to do this? And both Jarv and Igor have already chimed in and said, hey, we should do it this way. So it sounds like what we're probably going to do is create a canary variety of the GitLab shell daemon. So this will be something we deploy to our regional cluster, and we'll use weights to send more traffic over the course of time. The canary will effectively be what production is, but then it's the one that has the configuration to use GitLab shell daemon, GitLab SSH daemon. And then after we reach 100% of the traffic inside of Canary, we would just flip the flag inside of our zonal clusters and say, hey, you start using the new daemon instead of the OpenSSH daemon, and we'll just remove the weights of sending so much traffic into Canary. So I think that's a fine method. I just need to fine tune the implementation details and spend the necessary issues to get that work started.
Awesome. Great stuff. Nice work.
So I do consider that lower priority than the pages work. And plus there's still some loose ends on the epic associated with enabling that.
Yeah.
There's some engineering work that needs to be completed. So until that work is done, there's no need to start it. But I would like to at least get stuff planned out and some issues created and such. So I could at least work on that part.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah, you're totally right. There's definitely some outstanding bits. There is, it's not actually on the plan, but there's thought there's kind of some observability gaps as well that the developers would pick up.
I do see they've got a change to add some Prometheus scraping in
That's it.
place.
Right. Yeah.
And Jarvis, currently the reviewer, I did see that merge request and I at least commented on it. So hopefully that's like in good hands at this moment. It's
Awesome.
just a matter of getting it configured. Right now, I don't think that endpoint even works because we don't have the shell daemon like enabled
I
anywhere.
see. Okay. Yeah.
The one thing we could probably start doing whenever the GitLab shell team is ready, so we could enable this in pre-prod as a validation step because at such a small environment,
Mm,
I don't see the need to slowly roll GitLab shell in pre-prod. Just turn it on.
right.
If it
Yeah.
doesn't work, turn it off. And you
Yeah.
figure out what went wrong and turn it off. For staging, it'll be good to use that as a test bed for it. Let's validate our procedure of pushing this into
Yeah.
production works as desired.
Yeah. That makes total sense. That sounds good. One outstanding action that Sean has is to get quality involved. His kind of opinion when we chatted last week was that if this doesn't work, it will be pretty obvious quite rapidly.
Yeah.
But it would also be quite good to just get quality to give a bit of guidance on like, other things that should be tested.
Yeah. Okay. Is
Awesome.
there like a desire to add some QA testing somewhere?
Possibly, I think that's probably quality will probably help advise on that. But I mean, yeah,
Okay.
maybe so. I don't know what testing exists already,
Me
or if
neither.
any, for this. So yeah, I think you're totally right. Like, great to make progress here, but I don't think this is going to be like, turns around the next couple of weeks type of work.
I can't judge how quickly things are moving yet, so I don't know how fast they'll be ready for us to at least start pushing this into production, or
Yeah,
at least staging.
I think Sean mentioned on the sync that he was thinking about a month,
Okay.
but Dove has asked as well for some kind of timelines. So I think at the moment I'd assume like unknown, but you're right. It's certainly not a high urgency. It was a high urgency to have the discussion before Nick went out, but I don't think it's high urgency to land this in production. So
Yeah. Okay.
we can manage that.
It'll be interesting to see what QA returns because we could execute QA as soon as we turn it on and set it pre-prod.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that would be good. That would be good. Cool. So yeah, hopefully we'll get someone involved there. But great. I'm glad everyone came back and agreed on just the same option. That makes it a bit easier. Awesome. Is there any other stuff you want to go through?
I don't think so.
All righty. Well, thank you for the discussion. And I hope you have a good rest of your day and enjoy tomorrow.
Indeed. Thank you much. Have a good one.
All right. Catch you soon. Take care.
Bye.